G'day Internet, welcome back to another video. Now, where we left off in the last video, which you should check out whichever corner it ends up in, we wired up this 2GS to be able to use a RGB to HDMI. And it actually turned out really well, and it's not that hard of a job, so yeah, check out that other video. But I finished that one with making the comment that this modern 24-inch widescreen Samsung monitor really doesn't look the part. Now, a few comments were left that I should just simply use an old 4x3 monitor that has DVI, and I've got one of them here somewhere, and it certainly does look better, but most DVI, even 4x3 monitors were kind of in the age where everything was going black and grey, so finding a beige DVI monitor isn't the easiest in the world, put it that way. So given all of that, I set myself a challenge. And that challenge is to fit this 12-inch LCD panel into the original 2GS monitor case. This is the case from the dead one that I mentioned in the last video. But one day I would actually like to try and resurrect this. So I set myself a couple of rules. And the main one was that I was not going to damage or modify any of the original parts from the monitor that I will be reusing. So we're talking either of the two main plastic case pieces or the metal frame that goes inside. But let it be known that under no circumstances should I be considered any kind of 3D designer or builder or CAD expert or anyone who knows anything about design. 9/10 of what I do are crappy little brackets or little cases for gadgets, and that's about the extent of my experience. So this was a massive project for me. And as another limitation to myself, given my lack of skills in the area, every 3D designed part that you will see in this video, I did in Microsoft 3D Builder. Yes, the free Microsoft app that you can pull down from the Microsoft store and tinker with 3D shapes. It's essentially the 3D Builder for kindergarten. But it is an application that I've kind of managed to get the knack of, and so that's simply what I used. Now, finally, there are some parts in this that you will see today that have been pre-assembled, and that simply comes from me having to try and design and glue things together to see if they work, etc, etc, etc. So I'll explain those as I go along, as well as some of the designs that didn't really go to plan. It will be quite obvious, trust me. And I will also try to go in a little bit about my thinking when I was designing these parts. But I think that's enough excuses out of the way. Let's get building a 2GS LCD monitor. And we're going to start with the obvious bit, which is the front case. And the actual LCD, and I would like to get the ugliest bit of this design out of the way first, so, you know, hopefully by the end of the video you've forgotten about it. So this is the frame that actually goes over the LCD like such. Okay, not only does it support the LCD, but it also makes up the difference between the original curved CRT and the flat LCD panel. This is made up of 6 different parts, and I've got some of my misprints here to illustrate. First is the main frame, which goes just on there like that. It then has 4 locating lugs, which you can actually see here, that little black corner piece, hopefully you can see it. They glue in from the other side and essentially allow this, which can get a bit floppy, to be square and in place. But this is the bit that I struggled with the most from this whole thing, and it's because I can't do curves to save my life. The sides here are actually not too bad. It's this shape here that I really struggled with, and for the life of me, I could not match the curvature of the original case, which explains why this turned out so ugly. What I essentially did was kind of get it as rough in shape as I possibly could by sanding it down. I then lined the inside of this with some silicons, actually Vaseline, so things couldn't stick to it. I then put a small line of putty. I essentially used, what is it? It's a Shelley's product. It's like JB Weld, except it's an epoxy and not a metal-based thing. Anyway, so I laid that down there and essentially pushed this into the case to get the shape, then cleaned it all up. Well, I cleaned it all up in the bits that you can see. The outside shape I don't really care about. Sanded, filled, sanded, filled, sanded, filled, sanded, filled, painted, found a mistake, sanded, filled, sanded, painted again, and here's the shape. So, like I said, this just goes onto here like this, and it means that it is finally time to remove the plastic sheet from the front of the LCD, because I've been keeping that on through the whole design phase. And this I've marked top, make sure I've got the right top, yes. This goes on there like that, and then bring the case in, and this, oh so gently, drops into here. Now I've designed the rest of these brackets, let me turn this around so you're looking at the bottom. I've designed this so the frame sits flush against these bits that point out from there, right? These plastic bits. So this is where it starts to get a little tricky. We have two fairly large metal brackets which are part of the original chassis. These need to go in first. Now they do balance okay, but the bigger one's a bit more tricky. Then I've designed these little brackets here, which drop over the corner of the LCD, and then we screw it in using the original screws. Now, if it ends up sitting a little high, which this one kind of is, it might be worthwhile me throwing a washer underneath that, because I don't want it pushing down too hard on the LCD. Okay, I found some washers. They're quite thin, so I'm going to use 2. And if I put them in place, kind of, and then bracket in, that's a better fit, and then screw in. Remember to give it half a turn backwards so we don't destroy the plastic thread, and that should go in. Now I'm not going to tighten it up all the way because I want to check my alignment before I tighten it right up. But 2 more washers and another screw. Okay, I'll now go ahead and put the bottom 2 in and just check my alignment and stuff like that. And there we go. We can already get a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like. Now, I did hum and ha about doing this black or trying to color match. Now, I've had reasonable success when it comes to color matching, but when it's right in your face like this, and even if it's slightly off, it's going to stick out like dog's balls, so I went with black. It also hides quite a few sins about my bezel thing as well. So next up we have the control board for the LCD monitor, which is where we get our HDMI. And it's going to mount on this piece of acrylic. Ignore the ugly hole. It turns out that the 4 holes on this PCB aren't aligned straight. So yeah, we'll get back to that in a minute. And it's simply going to mount on there like that. Let me find all my random screws. And I'm simply going to do this with a screw, a larger nut to basically create a quick and easy spacer, through the hole, nut on the back. It's going to be a pain in the ass. Right, and I'll just loosely fit all of these, well, 3 of them at least. So that's 3 corners screwed in loosely. This corner here, which is the one that was way out and I didn't realise, also doesn't actually have enough room next to the barrel jack to put a screw in. So I have, in my collection of little 3D printed parts, this tiny little fellow here, and it goes just on the corner like that, and we will super glue that in. And with the tiniest little drop of super glue and some wishful thinking, let's get that on there and push down. Hold it. Now, the reason we're using this bit of acrylic, now I could have simply taken this control board and like double-sided sticky tape to the back of the LCD and we would have been good. But, well, I didn't want to do that. So this piece of acrylic is actually cut to the same size as the original PCB, and it will slot in the original grooves in this bracket, which is the main reason we reused the bottom bracket. Come on, slide in, slide in. I want the LED wire underneath, right? And that goes in there. It will then, oh, you need to get it above a couple of bits near the LCD, come on. And it will actually bump up against the brackets that we put in earlier. Now the problem then obviously is this can easily move back and forth, so I designed this little locking piece, which was a pain in the ass to get on, let alone off the first time, so hopefully this is the last time I have to do it. And it locks onto a screw lump here on the chassis. Now, I might need a flathead screwdriver to help me lever this on and pray it doesn't snap. Come on. And that one little bit there stops this from rocking back and forth. And at this point we can actually plug the 2 cables in. Probably could have done this before, but anyway. And which way does it go? It goes like that. And these plug into the back of the LCD panel. And at this point we've actually got, well, a working LCD. Everything's kind of plugged in, but obviously that's not it. If you look at the timestamp, you can see that we've got quite a way to go. Next, I want to turn my attention to this. This is obviously the back half of the original monitor. And I'm going to start with the power plug. Now, I've already made this up. It is essentially a panel mount 2.2 mil barrel jack through to a barrel plug. This will obviously then, it's essentially an extension lead from the back of the monitor to the control board. And it turns out that the original holes for your monitor adjustment are the perfect size for this. So this just goes in here and you've got literally just a couple of mil to play with. And we can put that on there like that. And the only thing I want to do is I want to make sure the orientation of the nut is so we have a flat edge to the top and bottom. It will make sense in a minute, I promise. So like that. The next thing I want to do is start filling some of these holes, right? It's more decorative than anything else. And even then, I've got to be honest, I didn't do my full kind of, sand to silky smooth and then paint and all the rest of it. So I'm going to start with, where is it here? With the 2 leftover round holes. Now, like I said, I don't want to modify this case, but I needed to find a neat way of doing it. So essentially what this and these are going to be is, I have a backing piece that comes through from underneath, and then this has got some locating pins. This gets then glued in place like that. And this is why that nut had to be a certain orientation. So, like I said, I've only ever done this dry fit, and in theory, I've got my super glue handy. And this goes there. I want just a tiny bit of super glue there and on the other one. And crap, where did I put it? There. And this should just drop into place. Hold it for a second. And there we go. The colour match, look, it's not perfect, but it's pretty close. And same again for the old video port. We've got a backing piece, a little bit of glue here, here, and a bit in the middle. Now, I don't want to use stupid amounts of glue, and the reason is it needs to be strong enough to hold the whole thing in place, but should I ever get to the point of restoring the original monitor, I need to remove these without, well, you know, completely trashing the whole thing, but that should glue there. Now, we're going to use the old power port for HDMI. Here's the part here covered in massive amounts of overspray. Please ignore that. This here uses what's called a keystone connector. Now, if you've ever done any like network cabling, you'll know what keystone is. Keystone is the standard for all the little blocks that go into like wall plates around your office or your home or whatever. And I've simply designed a bit that takes a keystone, which is this bit and all of this, and clips into place. And once again, I then have a backing piece. This one's a little bit more tricky because I've got to feed that cable through. Come on, get in there. It's a bit of a tight squeeze, which is actually good because it kind of holds in place. Right, swearing done. Now I want, and I don't want to get any of this on the actual case. So I'm going to put a little bit basically on this corner. Luckily, this Gorilla Gel is actually really easy to control and doesn't tend to go running away. Never actually used this glue before, but my normal stuff was out of stock. This then, I'm just going to hold that in place in case I bump it. This then gets carefully threaded through there, and that gets pushed in place. And that's all our back panels done. The next bit is actually, from a design point of view, the bit that I'm most happy with and kind of proud of. On the side of the original 2GS monitor, we have these cutouts. This was originally the power button, and then the brightness and contrast dials. Now, we're obviously not going to use them, but here's the original assembly here. And this simply goes in something like that, and there's your button and your dials. So I wanted to come up with a way of not just filling these, but actually using them. And I eventually came up with all of this here. This plate is essentially a replica of the main plate here, like this, with matching cutouts that match these holes here. I then came up with these brackets, which just use a very small momentary touch switch. This is obviously all still need to be wired up. I then designed and since painted some buttons. And the way it works is this. These buttons are a tight enough fit that they simply just push onto the head here. Okay, and there's our button. I'll quickly do the other two. Now, there is a little bit of leeway in this design. Now, this does have locating pegs in it, which is super glued from behind. But I want to get the alignment of these buttons as good as I possibly can, because they'll end up sitting kind of there like that. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply screw this in where it needs to be. Now, the tricky bit, just quick side note, the tricky bit about designing this is not only does it need to locate it 4 different places along the back, there is then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different bits along the front edge and a screw hole. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm so happy with this piece. And it goes in like so, and then there's a screw that goes in here. And that's now in the place where we want it to be. What I then want to do is to take each one of these, put some super glue on it, and get it, before it sets, basically get it perfectly aligned inside. So reaching for the super glue, and this is the bit that I am the most nervous about because I've basically got one shot at this. Get it lined up with the lugs. Get it lined up with my head in the way of the camera. That's pretty good. And push and hold. And we're in. And we have a working button. I'll now go and do the other two. And they're all in, and that's exactly how I wanted it to work out. Oh, that button's sticking a little. Oh no, there we go. Anyway, there we go. So this will be power, menu, plus and minus, but we'll get to that in a second. We're now at the point where we want to actually wire this up, and we're going to take a quick look at the original control board, which we're not going to be using. This has power, menu, plus, minus, and source. Well, source we don't care about. It's also got provisions for the LED, which we'll be taking from somewhere else. And it also has an IR receiver, which we don't care about either. Now, these all simply switch to ground. There's nothing special going on here at all. So the first step will be to run a common ground between all four of these switches. Right, let's wire this up. Right, that's possibly some of the ugliest soldering I've ever done. Pro tip, don't drink 3 cups of coffee before doing this kind of thing. Anyway, but it's all connected and functional. Next, we need to run some wiring from this thing. So I've just got some, this is 5 cores of just random ribbon wire. And in an attempt to do this neatly, we're going to strip it back to, well, we're going to separate the wires back to about there-ish. Okay, let's start with our furthest one away, which is here. Actually, let's pre-tin these other tabs first. All right, here's our longest one. I've stripped the end. I'm just going to tin the tip. Right, next one goes to about there. Okay, so that's all that wired up. In hindsight, I probably should have put a loop or something into this to zip tie the cable to, but I think that's pretty good. Next is this. This is the original loom, which goes back to the control board from our original button assembly. Ignore this, we'll get to that in a minute. But essentially what I want to do is I want to lop off this, which did go to the original control board, and then the pinout is actually on the back of this, so I can use that as a guide to work out what wires from this I need to join to this. Right, so obviously we're not going to need every wire from the original loom because we're simply not using it all. But I am going to start with ground, so a bit of heat shrink. And minus is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the end. 1, 2. Right, so this actually has an extra pin that I wasn't counting. Wonderful. Let's try that again. Okay, that's now all wired up. A couple of mistakes. This actually has an extra pin, which I wasn't accounting for. And I'd already run off with one of the wires at this end, which had already been stripped back up here, which I also didn't account for. And it's still entirely possible that I've wired the plus button and the minus button back to front, but that's an easy fix. But with that done, I should now be able to pop this in here and put its screw back in. We are now up to the final stage. First is a really short HDMI cable because the tail on that's not long enough, long story. And as we bring the two halves together, there are some things that are going to need plugging in, which is going to be a little on the cramp side and possibly a little hard to shoot. But basically we've got our HDMI, we've got our power, we can connect the front LED to this guy, matching orange to orange, like that. And finally plug this into the control board, making sure I get it the right way around. Like so. And then all things going well, oh, they are long enough, nice. And not getting caught up on the cables, this should slide together. Oop. This might be easier to do on its face. Aha! Right, hopefully I still have the original screws. I do seem to. I think the long ones go in the bottom. And there is our LCD'd 2GS monitor. So, with it all plugged in, I should be able to turn on the monitor. Yes. And turn on the computer. Went beep. And once the RGB to HDMI boots up, there we go. Now, when it gets to things looking right on the screen and fitting in with the cutout from the original case, it's not as easy as it seems. Let me explain. So what you're looking at here is the output resolution of the RGB to HDMI simply set to 800 by 600, which is the resolution of this LCD panel. The problem is that the actual LCD panel sits kind of out here somewhere, and so you can see that a lot of it is actually cut off. Now, it's completely usable, but it's not how the monitor should look on a 2GS. Now what you're looking at is a custom output resolution called 800 by 600 overscan. And what it allows me to do is, by pixels top, bottom, left and right, actually able to shrink the image into a specific viewport size. The downside of this is you have to use the interpolate output scaling, which is not as sharp as integer scaling, but to my eyes at least, it still looks really good. Now, I won't go into the details of it, but I'll put a link to the conversation I had with Ian B, who provided me this custom resolution, in the description below. And to me, it looks really good and, well, it just works. And if I was to reboot the computer, Total Replay, which runs in like native Apple II mode, looks fine. Like I mentioned before, you will get a little bit of shimmering, so hitting the Genlock button on the RGB to HDMI helps. But it works great, and I can, if I want, now spark up a game of Lode Runner. And there we go, finally, after many, many weeks, months maybe, of work, of designing and prototyping and swearing and more swearing, here is my LCD retrofitted 2GS monitor. And for the most part, I am happy with the outcome. Now, are there things that I would do differently if I was to do the whole thing again? Absolutely yes, for sure. The main one is that bezel that sits between the flat panel and the original curve of the case. Had I started from scratch and had the time or whatever, or learnt from my mistakes, which I guess I now have, I would go about it one of two different ways. Either I would simply find someone who is a lot better 3D designer than I am, and that's not difficult, or I would actually have taken the front half of the case and had it 3D scanned so I had something specific to build against. And that is actually still a possibility. I think we have a 3D scanner at work that may do the job, so I may yet go and have another crack at it. The buttons on the side, that as much as I am actually really pleased with the way I came up with a solution, they do still kind of stick and jam a little bit. And that's mainly because I should have put extra springs in behind them and not just relied on the spring that's built into the little switches that I used. And that probably would have given them enough force to pop back out when they do get a little stuck. Now, unfortunately, because it is now all glued together, I can't actually do that. I can't retrofit those springs. So if I ever decide to go back and do it, I'm going to actually have to reprint most of it, which of course is doable. It's just that all those parts I have printed and reprinted just dozens of times and spent days watching the printer go as I developed prototypes and worked out little bugs and fixed them, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I now have a Apple IIgs that looks complete and it looks the part. Yes, it's not an original CRT monitor, I know, but for those of you out there, hopefully amongst the previous video and this one, you may come up with your own idea for even if it's just fitting the RGB to HDMI bit to your 2GS, because I guarantee you there are a lot more Apple 2GSs out there now than there are matching monitors. But anyway, what I will do is I will take all the STL files from this entire project and I'll upload them to Thingiverse. Use what you want or you need. Maybe someone can help and chip in and redesign that part for the rest of us, including myself. So they're there, use them, don't use them, whatever, improve on them. I'm really not that fussed. Although if you do modify and update or change them and improve them, please let me know. Like I've said at the very beginning, I'm basically at the play school level of 3D design and have got a lot to learn and a long way to go with my skills. But for now, that will pretty much do it. If you liked the video, click like, subscribe, all the usual YouTubey stuff. As always, a massive shout out to my Patreons who are scrolling up the screen as I speak. And if you would like to help out the channel, there is a link in the description. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.